Welcome to the Freedom Fridays Project podcast. I'm Pete Clark, your host, the Whispers Guy. It appears that work expands to the time that we give it, and I started to explore how I was investing my time and effort, particularly on Fridays. It's evolved to an exploration and experiment with time, energy, attention and identity, and a mindset shift from I have to I choose to. So if you're interested in exploring some changes to the way that you invest your time and your energy, if you'd like some tips on the way as you make some changes perhaps to your identity, if you would like the freedom of I choose to, away from I have to, then this is the podcast for you. So welcome to the Freedom Fridays Project podcast. Welcome to this week's episode, where it's a particularly poignant conversation this week. I'm, due to the pandemic, back in touch with an old buddy who I'm delighted to be back in touch with, who's got, I think, a fascinating change story. And so before I say too much about that, let me introduce Dougie Samuel. Hey, Dougie.
Good morning. Hi, Pete. Are you well?
How are you doing this morning in a fair Brobrecht, Edinburgh?
I'm very good, thanks. It's actually sunny. Everybody's smiling.
It's sunny. It's that one day in the summer that the sun's in Edinburgh.
This is our summer. We're going to get 3 consecutive days of sun, so everybody's got the shorts on and celebrating.
That's it. Yeah, we're having a barbecue. Dougie, I start this every time when I interview someone with the same question. I'm going to ask you the same question. That Freedom Fridays, the podcast, is all about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and they've made a big change. You know, they've kind of gone from I have to I choose to. Can you share with the listeners what your have to choose to is?
Yeah, and first of all, can I say thanks for having me on the podcast? It's a pleasure and a real honour to actually have this conversation with you. I guess the significant change for me was on the back of a heart attack 3 years ago. Right. I took a bit of time to reflect on my life up to that point, and I recognised that I'd been working too hard and working too many hours. Hugely well-intentioned, all driven and born out to want to help others, but the cost had been I hadn't been looking after myself. So although you'd drawn a diagram many years before that said warm up, peak perform, warm down, and don't forget your QRT, my QRT had disappeared by that point, and I was just totally consumed in 2 jobs. So I decided that when I returned from my heart attack that I would reduce my working week to 4 days, and I no longer work Mondays. And it was a deal I sort of came to with my wife, actually, to allow me to continue football coaching, because something had to give. Because in simple terms, what I'd been doing up to that point had obviously resulted in me on an operating theatre getting 2 stents fitted. So I had to change something. So that was the compromise, and enabled me to continue with both jobs. And it's probably one of the best things I ever did. And it reminds me of my previous time when I worked in Standard Life, where again I wanted to create some space and time in my life to try different things, and I actually went to compressed hours. Now, I went to compressed hours, but truthfully I still worked a full working week, because I think the reality is that we're always busy. There's always things to do. There'll always be things on your to-do list, and sometimes it's quite powerful just asking the question, well, what would happen if I didn't do that?
Yeah. Wow. So you are living Freedom Fridays as Freedom Mondays.
Yeah, Freedom Mondays. Absolutely. And I think I'm much more relaxed now, and I'm more forgiving of myself if I didn't get through everything that I maybe to try and achieve at the start of the day. I think that's the big thing, is that trying to focus my emotional energy on what matters and what counts. And that includes myself, but also my family and my loved ones, and not just my work.
Yeah. I remember, I think I was nosing in on a conference decades ago. I can't remember who it was. And it was a facilitator or a trainer saying in front of a young group who were getting into new management positions. And they said, look, whenever you have a position, I think they said authority. So whether it's a parent, a leader, a coach or whatever, they said, you will never get everything done. And it stuck with me, right? 30 years later.
Yeah, what a pearl of wisdom. I mean, phenomenal and very, very true. And I think that, especially if you're a leader who is a servant leader and cares about others and wants to make sure that environment's right and as an environment that enables them to flourish, but all the time you're the safety net that takes accountability and takes the responsibility off their shoulders when they fall over.
Yeah.
You never switch off, really.
Dougie, can I ask you a couple of questions about the heart attack? The reason I'm going to ask you about it is because I often use that as an example. You may remember, it was in the UK actually, and I used this example years ago, billboard campaign up and down the M1, middle-aged man like us, bare chest with a belt tightened around the chest, saying that I think it was the stat 55% of heart attacks in men are the first sign they've got a problem. So the first sign, the first whisper is sudden death.
Yep.
Which is quite stark, and it was trying to fix and trying to nudge us to, exercise, sleep, etc., etc. Prior to the heart attack, had you had any whispers?
On reflection, no. I mean, I probably had the odd migraine.
Right.
I had the odd periods of reflection where I probably got a bit down on myself because I'd maybe put on a bit of weight and I wasn't at the gym as much as I would have liked. But that stat is bang on for me. And what was actually quite revealing was that the number of people who, when I met them post-heart attack, the first words they said were, "You're the last person I expected to have a heart attack." You're all
Is that right?
Followed up with, "You're always on the go." And the clue was in the second part.
Yeah.
Their association with me was a guy who lived in the world of sport, therefore I'd be naturally fit and healthy.
Yeah.
So once I was preaching all the things to my players and preaching all the things about QRT to my staff, I was the classic, not actually following it and living it myself.
Yeah.
And again, who's the well-intentioned, So if I didn't have lunch one day, it was because I was trying to help somebody and I was trying to get to the next meeting because it was quite crucial that I was at the next meeting. So I was grabbing something that would give me a sugar rush that would get me through the next couple of hours.
Yeah.
The irony about my heart attack as well is it actually it happened when I was taking part in a spin class. So I'd recognized the need to make some time to start to go back to the gym and so on. And it was quite early in that process of going back to incorporating regular exercise into my week that it happened.
Yeah, wow.
Thankfully, it did reveal itself.
And I'm interested. So obviously you had the event, you're okay. And I believe it's your 3rd year anniversary, literally this week.
Just on Friday.
The conversation you had with your wife, how did that go?
Well, that was difficult because she was on the bike next to me. So she's quite...
Sorry, I'm not laughing at you.
I mean, that's the thing. So she was quite literally in the spin class right next to me and watched her husband have a heart attack in front of her eyes.
Wow.
Which is obviously traumatic for her as well. And as you would expect, we all deal with things in different ways. So I'm someone that wears my heart on my sleeve. Generally, I like to talk about things. My wife's a bit deeper than that and maybe isn't as comfortable speaking about her feelings as I am. So that's been an interesting conversation, an interesting journey because my family didn't want to lose me. So the last thing they want to see is me falling back into maybe like my old ways and old habits. I think that there was a danger actually in the pandemic of me slipping back into that because there was so many people in our community that needed help. I sort of threw myself into that and I'm part of an amazing organisation. I'm very lucky to be part of an amazing team here at the Academy who in a privileged position that we have an opportunity to help people that are less fortunate than us in our local community. And for a spell last year, I was back working full time again. So that Monday had been consumed and had gone. And I was back just going hammer and tong. And guess what happened? I started eating the muffins in the morning again and the chocolate bars. And I started to put on a little bit of weight again. So, I think I've now got in my head, I know what weight I was when I had the heart attack. So in practical terms, that's a metric that I can measure and I can keep an eye on. But it's more the mental side, actually. It's more just sure that I'm creating time for me just to rest and chill and, do a crude form of meditation every now and then and just relax.
one of the maxims that I've tried to at least listen to as a whisper for me and kind of live by is this in a relationship. And there's a reason I'm asking the question about your wife, which I'll come to in a second, is I'll look after me for you as long as you look after you for me. And so, the kind of, typically the Western marriage vows means, look after me in sickness and in health, which is, nice, but it's a little bit dependent. And if I get ill, it's your fault. You haven't looked after me, which is, that's not what's meant by it. But I'm taking responsibility to look after me for the benefit of us, as long as you look after you for the benefit of us. That's a very interdependent relationship. So the reason I asked you about your wife was, with the people that I know have made these big changes, whether they've been forced to do it or they're choosing to do it, having that conversation with their significant other is a really tough conversation. And I'm interested in how it went, because if it goes one way, you've kind of got a little bit of permission to do 4 days a week, as simple as that sounds, or not.
I guess what worked in my favour was in my mid sort of 30s, late 30s, I'd had an equally sort of difficult conversation about me leaving the corporate world. I had a good job and standard. We had a good quality of life. And I'd been going on various different personal development courses and doing a bit more self-reflection around what my purpose was and what my values were. And I wanted to become an elite performance football coach, and I wanted to work in the third sector. And I had a difficult conversation that meant leaving standard life and taking a leap of faith. It's called leap of faith, no leap of fear. And I think because we'd been through that together and she backed me then, and that's led to some amazing experiences on the back of taking that leap of faith. I think there's a trust there, and that she trusts me. But it doesn't mean to say it's not scary. And it's probably all the more scary for her because sadly, as a young girl, she lost her dad to a heart attack. So I'm aware it's been really traumatic for her. And going back to your earlier point, I wouldn't be here 3 years later, probably fitter and healthier than I've been for a long time if it wasn't for her having her support. And in practical terms, in the immediate aftermath, just making sure that I was putting myself first, but also just making sure I was eating healthier. It's been an amazing learning experience, I have to say, an amazing learning experience.
And I know when you say putting myself first, you mean so I can then help others. It's not a selfish, narcissistic, I'm going to look after me. It's more doing it so I can be of service to others.
Absolutely, because if we don't take moments to fill our own well, then we go to empty our well to help others. There's nothing there.
Yeah.
And we'll have to make time to fill our own well. And I used to feel guilty about that. Whereas now, my routine's changed. So the start of my day is actually where I've created me time. So when I first up in the morning, that's when I'll do my bits of exercise, or I'll go a walk, or I'll listen to a podcast. And then I can empty my well for the rest of the day.
Right.
But I've done something for me at the start of the day that's prepared me.
So you're kind of paying it forward for yourself.
I'm trying to. I'm not good to anybody if I'm not here.
Yeah.
I think that it's difficult because if you're a giver and if you're somebody who likes to help others, then there's various traits, isn't there? So you struggle with taking compliments. You struggle with putting yourself out for you when it's a thing that you like to do yourself. So again, experience, I've learned that the same thrill and the same joy I get for giving and helping others, I'm depriving other people of that when I say, no, I'm all right.
Yeah.
Let them in, let them help you on your journey.
Yeah.
And I guess in classic sort of Brené Brown language, allow yourself to be seen, to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
So I'm still very much living in the arena, but I'm trying to do that in a more self-aware way that means I'm better equipped to do even more when I'm in that arena.
Yeah.
And add more value, because I'm pretty sure when you're tired and you're run down, you're a bit more crabby. And although you think you're helping people, you're maybe helping people with a wee bit of rawness and a wee bit of edge that they didn't need. So
yeah.
I want to try and make sure that I'm kind and generous and compassionate, and I'm not somebody
of that there is no doubt, my friend.
Thank you. That's really nice of you. Thank you.
Why Monday?
Truthfully, because I've got a game on a Saturday, so my two jobs, get the chief executive of the charitable arm of the football club, and I'm also the head coach of the men's first team. So I went for the Monday because it meant, no, psychologically, I would still have a weekend because I'd have a Sunday and a Monday off.
Okay, cool.
And in part also because my wife didn't work a Monday. So it meant that I was guaranteed a day where we could do whatever we wanted together, and I'd be on hand to help and support and so on. So so that was why I went with the Monday.
Cool. And that's a perfect example of, Freedom Fridays is not about Fridays. It could be anything.
It's about creating space to do other things.
Yeah. So what do you do with the space? Do you invest it or do you spend it?
Both, actually.
Cool.
So I think, like I said, that in terms of ending it, we might enjoy going to the pictures. We might enjoy something as grand as going to Wimbledon 2 weeks ago. We might get to do something. And I'm very, very lucky to be able to do things like that. But I also try and invest it in my ongoing development. So I'll listen to a podcast. I'll maybe like to watch a documentary. I'll try and do something that's about feeding my brain. That's I find hard to switch off. Is I love learning, and I love learning for others, and just hearing about their stories and their journeys and how that might apply to me, and just give me a light bulb moment. I remember watching a documentary with Billy Connolly, and he was talking about Parkinson's disease, and he said something that felt like a slap in the face, because it was the first thing I heard that I could resonate with in terms of what it feels like to have had a heart attack, and then afterwards know that you've had a heart attack, and every day wondering, is it going to be that day that you're going to have your next heart attack? And when he was talking about Parkinson's disease, he said it wasn't like the flu or the cold, where that's going to pass in 4 or 5 days. It's just there all the time. Yeah. And the short version, but that was the gist of it. And I thought, God, that's what it feels like mentally for me, is that in the early days, I couldn't sleep because I was frightened I wasn't going to wake up in the morning. So I used to listen to podcasts in bed at night and literally have taught me to sleep. Now, I know I understand the value, and obviously, the subconscious is still taking that in.
Yeah.
From that point of view, I was like, no, I'm not really listening to this podcast because I can't sleep. I'm listening to this podcast because I want to learn. No, I was actually listening to the podcast because I needed somebody to talk me to sleep. Yeah. But self-voice and that conversation that we have with ourselves, that's a constant tension for me in terms of the voice of self-doubt versus the voice of self-belief. That's tension I'm fighting every day.
One of the last books that I read about Billy Connolly, he made a really neat distinction. He said, we're often asked, where are you from? Which is an easy question to answer.
Yes.
He thinks a better question is, what are you from?
That's nice.
Dougie, what are you from?
I'm from quite a traditional working class family in Leith. A mum and dad who adored me, who had me very young, but adored me and taught me key values like hard work. And I guess the mantra my father brought me up with especially was never to look down on anybody, but don't let anybody look down on you. So I've probably got a wee gritty side that comes from a working class background. Yeah. But yeah, I come from quite a basic home that people would probably describe, others who didn't come from that type of environment would probably describe as being like a low-income family and poor, but I never ever once felt poor. I felt adored and I felt loved, and my mum and dad are my heroes. But I'm really proud to come to Leith. Leith's a port, it's a part of Edinburgh, it's got a sense of identity, it's very much sort of steeped in working class roots and working class values. So I come from very humble beginnings, and I hope I've remained humble.
Oh, well, I think there's no doubt about that, my friend.
Thank you.
One of the things I'm interested in just chatting about is the role that you have. Maybe just take 30 seconds to explain what the role is. And then what I'm interested in that role, you obviously are served with looking after coaching some young footballers. And I still play over 45 soccer. And a lot of my friends are now coaching kids and youth teams, etc., etc. So it's interesting when you go from playing a sport, a game, a thing, to you're in the same arena, but you're actually now charged with the development of others. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about the role and then tell us what's that like when you're now in service of developing, growing others, and especially given it's not just about skill. I'll be interested in your take on that.
I think because I've always been fascinated about how we learn and how others learn, and this phrase that one of my friends, Peter Hill, introduced me to called maps of the world, how we're all a product of our environment and how we see things differently. I mean, certainly the joy for me as a player was feeling that sense of belonging and that sense of togetherness with friends in a dressing room and achieving something as part of a team. So I guess that's one of the big drivers for me, is that how do I create an environment that enables our players to feel safe and comfortable and willing to sacrifice themselves for others. Phil Jackson has a lovely phrase, sacrifice the me for the we, that from Sacred Hoops. And it was probably reading his book that I first really thought about the importance of love and compassion in a dressing room. Development of others for me is very much focused around that, and having the courage to role model that as a man in a very alpha male environment, I think is probably the biggest challenge I've faced, but the one that I hope I've been able to overcome. Because sport and dressing rooms traditionally over the years have been like quite aggressive, certainly when I played. And I just felt that there was a different way to coach. And listen, I'm as capable as the next guy, I like losing my rag, as my mum would say, and having a wee blow. But generally speaking, I'm trying to create an environment that enables people to feel safe enough to step forward and ask questions and to learn from each other and to give to each other and to go on a journey with each other that enables us to deliver something where the sum of the parts is greater than the sum of the individual parts. So it's, how do you define that? How do you define that special chemistry that can be created when essentially you're trying to create that flow state across a group of people where in a moment, nothing else exists in their world except being a part of something together and trying to help each other become the best version of themselves. That's a special place to be. And listen, it doesn't happen very often, but when it happens, it's an incredible feeling. It's a magic feeling. The difference as a player, I think, and a coach is, for me anyway, personally, is that on the high, when it was the highs and with the successful days, like you said, all night after the game, you'd be recounting the things that happened in the game, and you'd be buzzing with your teammates and so on. Whereas I think the thrill for me sort of comes after the event now as a coach. It's more the next day or in the subsequent days where you think back to all the effort and all the application that's gone into getting to that point. It's very different, but I think at the core for me, certainly as an individual, it's still very much about that sense of belonging and trying to create that environment where people are willing to sacrifice themselves for the benefit of others. And I think the truest forum, we're wired to give. I think it's in our natural DNA to look out for each other and to care for each other. So I'm just trying to encourage guys to strip it right back and in some ways just be naked in that dressing room and just be true to themselves and just be themselves.
Which from my memory of youth football in Edinburgh is not the easiest task.
No, but I think that where coaches now are very lucky compared to when you and I were young and playing youth football, is that look at the resources and the materials that are available to coaches now for them to educate themselves. Whether it's like Weck's work around growth mindset or Brenny Brown we're talking about earlier on. Can you imagine football coaches talking about Brenny Brown 30 years ago when we were? No. I think it's amazing that I think there's now recognition that actually it's about how do we create better people in the first place, and then followed by better sportsmen and women.
And Dougie, how does that translate into the other aspect of your role where can you explain what the Academy is?
Yeah, of course. So the Academy is a charitable arm of Spartans Football Club. It's a registered charity, but it also is a social enterprise. So we, in simple terms, run and manage a £4 million sports facility, which is also the home to the football club. The charity has specific social aims and objectives, where we're trying to, in simple terms, make a difference in our wee patch of the world. So our wee patch of the world is North Edinburgh. How can we improve the quality of people's lives in North Edinburgh? So as a football club, taking a step back and thinking about what are the historical social needs and issues in this community, where we're based. So how can you take that community of interest, which is everybody who's attached with and associated with a football club, and make a meaningful difference in the place where you live, so that community of place. And it's trying to bring those two things together. And in terms of like tackling social needs and issues, we are focused around trying to make a difference in education, in youth work, in physical health and well-being. And we also want to be an active player, an active partner in community cohesion, or like I say, trying to build social capital in our local communities so that you can, as I said earlier on, like I said, yeah, a community that can be proud of itself, proud of its achievements, and can produce good human beings who can go on and make a meaningful difference. That's what we're trying to create. But it's difficult. It's difficult. There's like challenges in this community, but there's also a lot of really good people in this community. And it's important to talk up the community.
And the Dougie that turns up in the dressing room at 10 to 3 on a Saturday afternoon versus the Dougie that turns up at home with his wife and kids versus the Dougie that turns up, in a youth hall in North Edinburgh with, 4 Keeleys. Same, different hats, same person?
Absolutely same person. I think that one of the joys of my life is that I've been able to meet people like yourself and who've asked me great questions and challenged me to go inside and think about what are my values. So it's not like I put on a blue coat on a Saturday when I'm a football coach and I put on a red coat on a Monday when I'm the chief executive of the academy. Yeah. My values are consistent. So the way I'm going to deliver, the way I'm going to execute is going to come from a place of love and compassion, I think, and kindness and caring for others. That doesn't change in terms of whatever the setting might be. I hope I'm consistent and I'm authentic. There's a clear alignment there in terms of my values in each of those different settings, and having the confidence just to be me. I can't encourage other people just to be true to themselves and to be themselves, and then live my life as a fraud. And if that means that some people maybe don't want me or don't maybe agree with it, that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. You use a phrase many years ago, which stuck with me, which was what a fascinating map of the world that person has. That's, it's what a fascinating take they have on things. And it's a nice way of letting things go and not letting things bog you down, So no, I'm very much the same person. I think the older you get as well, I think you recognize how important it is to be true to yourself, actually.
But it does require some work in looking inside to understand who yourself is.
Absolutely. And understanding what's the intention. I think, what's the intention behind my actions? I think it's a key thing for us to think about, in any conversation we have and any action that we take. What is ultimately the intention behind that? Why are we choosing to do that, and thinking about that, and thinking about the outcome that we want, and is that the outcome that is best for everybody, or is it just something that's going to make me feel good or make me look good? What it's about, as I said, trying to help others be and become the best version of themselves. And if you're in a position where you can play a small part in that, then how lucky are you? I'm a job where I get a chance to help people. So,
in the work I do, Dougie, as you know, I get asked a lot about values, personal and corporate. You're obviously someone that has done work on that. I'm interested if you could share how often and how do you review them? And over the years, how or which ones have changed?
Well, that's a great question. So we will, and let's start with the easy one. The easy one is, I guess, the corporate one. Every business will have annual away days. We'll review things like their strategic plans and their missions and their purposes and everything else. And everybody will get invited to have a think about, is that still relevant, and so on. And that's right, that's appropriate. In terms of my personal ones, I've probably become more aware of the importance of being in this job, especially in the last 10 years, of being non-judgmental and trying to work that wee bit harder at understanding what are my blind spots. Because I'm a product of my environment. I'm a middle-aged male. And no, I can speak about inclusion, I can speak about equality and all these things, and I can speak about them for a place of authenticity, and that I'm not, these are things that I want to see. But I've not got lived experience of being someone living in the minority, or someone who's actually like being held back and held down because of their race. So, I've got to work. I've got to double up on that to really listen, to try and understand, but never ever say I know or because I don't, and I never truly will. But so I think being non-judgmental, I think is something that's become a bigger priority for me, and something that's become more important, and probably wasn't something that if you'd asked me a question about my values in my 30s that I would have consciously said. I would have hoped that I would have been that type of person, but I don't think I would have consciously like really measure myself against that. And things like fairness and hard work, they've always been there.
Yeah.
They've always been there. But I think things like honor and uniqueness in others and being non-judgmental, those are things that are relatively new in the context of my own personal journey. And those are things that I hold dear in terms of like the lens through which I want the academy and the football club to see the world and how it lives and breathes with its community.
Dougie, given the change you've made, Freedom Mondays, if you were giving somebody a piece of advice because they were considering a big change, whether it's a Monday off or a Friday off or, whatever it was, significant, it was them moving from, oh God, I've got to do this versus I can choose to do this. In the spirit of that, what's the biggest piece of advice you could give them in hindsight based on your experience?
It's a little bit like, I'm a visual learner and a kinesthetic learner. So I attach things to images or feelings and emotions. If you're willing to walk forward with your eyes wide open and looking forward, everything's going to be okay because you're going to attract like-minded people. You're going to spot the opportunities. If you take the plunge, but you don't quite cut the umbilical cord, so you're walking forward, but you're actually walking backwards because you keep talking about things you did in the past, or you keep longing to go back there, then you're not ready. You're not ready. The big thing would be for me is that what I learned was through this experience was that the opportunities that came my way once I created the space seemed to multiply. And when I asked one or two people the question, like, why didn't you think to ask me before? Or that's interesting, you're asking me now because actually, would you believe it? I've actually got time to actually help you with that now.
Yeah.
Again, what came back was, well, I was desperate to ask you, but I could see how busy you were and I didn't want to like bother you. I was like, but I would have loved to have helped you with that. In fact, part of me was offended that you didn't ask me because I'm your friend and I think I could have helped you with that. Yeah, but I could see you're already spinning lots of plates. So again, it's just having faith that to listen to and to trust your gut and to have the confidence to be true to yourself. I mean, it's really interesting for me that probably the most significant things that have happened in my life and been the life-changing things that have led me to the riches have been on the back of sort of like being rejected or the back of disappointment.
Interesting.
I ended up at Spartans because my former club, Whitehall Welfare, didn't want to keep me. They thought I was washed up. They thought at 34 my legs had gone. I'd been there 8 years. I'd been captain there. I loved the club. Same time, Spartans were desperate for me to come and play for them. They still value in me, and they made me feel wanted, and they made it easy to actually like leave. Although at the time it wasn't, they made it easy through their approach and their dreams and their aspirations. But ultimately, it happened because somebody else didn't want me.
Isn't that interesting? And for those obviously that are listening and wouldn't know, Whitehill Welfare as an amateur football club in those days, that was a big deal, right?
It was Spartan's biggest rival.
It was a massive, for those of us that played football in Scotland, in Edinburgh, in amateur football, that's almost as good as it gets.
Yep.
And they're saying, Dougie, you're not good enough. Out you go. Sling your hook, mate.
Yeah, but it's fascinating because the same thing happened in when I worked in Standard Life, that a senior manager effectively decided she didn't want me on our management team. And I became up for grabs. Like the other senior managers could effectively like pitch for me and say, I'd like him on my team. But the harsh reality was that process only started because she had the courage to say, he doesn't fit in. And I didn't want him on my management team.
Yeah.
And up at that point in my career, nobody had given me that type of feedback, and I'd never been rejected. And then an incredible thing happened. One of the first bagger advances came out the shadows from me, a guy called Phil Jacobs, walked up to my desk and said to me that he'd heard what had happened. For what it's worth, he says, I don't agree with what's happened. I'd love you to come and work for me one day. He says, but only if you choose the E over the I. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, there's a word in the English dictionary. He says, if you change one letter in that word, it's going to determine what direction you're going to go. And he wrote on a piece of paper, B space TTER. He says, so what are you going to put in the space? Are you going to put an I or an E? If you choose the E, come and work for me. And I thought, wow. I didn't even know the guy. I knew who he was, but I never worked with him. And no, the rest, as I say, is history. I went to work in HR, which then led to me meeting you 3-4 months later. And you won't remember it, but the lady who'd actually rejected me, you invited us to change the meaning when it came to breaking the block of wood. And I don't know if you remember me whispering in your ear, I've put her face on the block of wood, Pete.
I do remember that, yeah.
And I had to let it go because I was still being defined by her opinion of me and not my own opinion of myself.
Yeah.
And opinion of me. So, and that allowed me to move forward, and then led me to like some fantastic experiences. So it's amazing how like what can feel like the most difficult, most challenging, stressful time at the time can actually be the biggest learning opportunity and can lead you down a different path that I guess in some ways I say to people, this job I'm doing now, like Standard Life prepared me for it in every way. But this was my day.
And I hear that story many times, and there's many books behind me on those very things about the most beautiful flowers grow in adversity.
Yeah.
Do you think it would have been the turning point? And this is speculation, right? Do you think it would have been the turning point had you known?
Probably not, actually.
Isn't that ironic? That it's kind of like the gift is we don't know.
Yeah, and the gift, I think, and sometimes I think we crave for we crave for a model. We crave for join the dots. We crave for someone to show us sometimes, when actually the real joy is in discovering yourself, and discovering like who you are and what you're capable of, and facing those demons and facing those fears. I remember after I'd been on Mastering Your Motivation with yourself, several months later, and I think Speakers International had now moved on, but people had got wind of the course and everybody was talking about it, and it had been so well received. And somebody had suggested, oh, you should do a workshop on that. You should come and speak at the next conference on that. And I remember taking the call, and I still remember it to this day. And I could hear my voice saying, oh, you can't do that, you can't do that. But the words that came out were, yeah, I'll do that for you. And I thought, bloody hell, what am I doing? So that's stepping out your comfort zone and pushing yourself. And for me, it's about learning for other people and applying it to your situation, to your life. Like you say, it's not about like just picking something up and saying, okay, I'm just going to apply that. It's actually how do you apply that in the context of your life and what your aspirations are. That's why you have such creative swiping in this industry, because most of this stuff's been there for centuries, as you know. It just gets rebranded, reframed, but it gets rebranded and reframed because somebody else has come up with something, an original way defining it for them that's worked for them, that's led to success for them or led to success a group of people they've been a part of. So they then go and recycle that. But in essence, it's the same things that people were saying hundreds of years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why do we complicate it?
A couple of final questions from me, Dougie. I love that little turn of phrase. And like we say, you didn't know he was going to come into your life, but just the E or the I, bitter or better. Yeah. I love that. Very, very good. What's now been better for you?
I think the perfectionist Dougie is airtime. He gets less airtime.
Right.
That fear of failure and the perfectionist in me made it tough sometimes, if I'm honest. Whereas now I can, and this was probably one of my biggest learns for Tuesdays with Maury. actually.
One of our favourites.
One of our favourites, absolute favourite, mate. The importance of being able to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
No, I think I can do that much better now. I think I look for and listen for the signs a bit more now, where I need to just slow down. Just need to create maybe a bit of time just to reflect and just do a bit of thinking, because I think it's such a skill being able to identify when you need to think about what you need to think about, because we go so fast and we run so fast because we're always trying to get somewhere or do something. I say to people, you need to think about what you need to think about. Their face screws up because they think, what? You say, yeah, why? That's why. And again, that's not something that I would have proactively done in my 20s and 30s. But I'm much better at that now, in terms of like creating that sense of, well, I've got my hands on the wheel here because I'm choosing to invest my time in this.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I'm deciding where the car's going, and it's just that alignment thing again I said earlier on. So for me, like, when I'm thinking of like keywords that sort of shape and inform everything, it's things like consistency, authenticity, alignment, and ultimately just trying to be you, just try and be a good person.
I know you're into podcasts. I don't know if you listen to Andrew Huberman.
No, not yet. But
he's a neuroscientist called the Huberman Lab, and he was interviewed by Tim Ferriss. Ferriss is a great podcaster, and so Huberman was asked, a little bit like Tim Ferriss has answered many times, if you could give people one piece of advice based on all of your knowledge of neuroscience and all the sort of exercise, mental, cognitive skills and things that you know about, what's the one piece of advice? And like anyone who knows a lot of that stuff, they do reflect. It takes a bit of time because there's so many things they could share with us. And he said, look, I can't walk past something that apparently was written in the Oracle at, the Adelphi, centuries and centuries ago, which is very simply, but not easy, to know thyself.
Yeah.
That's the greatest piece of advice you get, to know thyself, which is staggeringly simple, but staggeringly complex at the same time.
Absolutely. I mean, I gave a player feedback on Saturday after the match, which we lost 1-0. And it was probably a little bit harsh, actually, on reflection. And I explained to him the next day and day that what was really going on was my subconscious was frustrated, and I had interference, because it feels like just now our ability to prepare to the best of our ability is being sabotaged by COVID, because having to self-isolate and so on and so forth. But also, we spoke about actually off air earlier on, which is so important just now more than ever, that I respect that football is just a part of our players' lives, and it's a part of their life that should bring joy and should be fun. So it shouldn't be stressful asking for a weekend off or a holiday off, and have consequences that it creates an atmosphere or it's like an issue. Because now more than ever, we need to be spending time, investing time, to use your word, in QRT.
Yeah. And for the listener, QRT stands for?
Sorry, quality recovery time.
There you go, mate. Dougie, couple of last questions. What don't you know about yourself?
How far I can take myself out of my comfort zone.
Okay.
I think there's still a bit capacity there. I'm still false expectations appearing real sometimes get the better of me.
Yeah. And then final formal question. What's something you know about yourself that you love?
We're not very comfortable speaking about ourselves. What do I love about myself? I don't think I know. I generally care about others and I'm compassionate. And I think that married to that, going back to probably where we started in terms of my dad's mantra, I do think I'm humble and I never look down on anybody.
Yeah.
I hope that never changes.
Yeah, and look, a bit of banter here. Those that don't know, Dougie isn't the tallest person in the world. So for him to say that, it's not just literal. It's obviously metaphorical, which I found interesting, because you're not the biggest guy. And yet you can walk into a changing room of guys that are significantly physically larger than you, but still hold court.
Yep, that's fine. I'm not intimidated by that. Intimidated by that. I think that it's probably, well, the confidence will come from knowing that I've done my prep and I know my subject and I know that what I believe in what I'm saying. And again, I go back to one of my key words, so I'm authentic.
Yeah.
And they can choose to get on the bus with me or they can choose to get off the bus. That's fine.
Yeah, they know what they're getting.
Yeah, and if I'm being true to me, then I accept it in life that not everybody's going to like connect on a deep level, and that's fine. But the greatest joy in the dressing room for me and why I'm still there is that I still feel a connection with the players. And when I didn't feel that connection in terms of me being able to play a small part in their journey and helping them to become better people, then that'll be the time for me to go. And that's the thing that drives me more than the result on the Saturday.
Yeah. Dougie, I've got 5 quick questions for you. You don't know what these are, so we're looking for your quickest response.
Oh, gosh.
Dougie Samuel scores the winning goal in the Scottish Cup final, or Spartans win the Scottish Cup final?
Spartans win the Scottish Cup final.
Kenny Dalglish or Ali McCoist?
Dalglish.
You're taking a penalty. Bottom left or bottom right?
Bottom left.
A book that's changed your life?
Without question, Chooses with Maury, an old man, a young man, and life's greatest lessons. My favourite of all time.
Your favourite Scottish word?
Barry.
And for the listeners, explain what Barry means.
That something's magic. It's great. Wonderful. Couldn't be better.
Yeah, I just had a moment where I thought I knew exactly what you meant, but I thought I'd better explain it for probably 99% of people that are listening that don't know what Barry
Absolutely.
means.
Absolutely. So today the sun's out. I get to engage with a good friend. Life is Barry.
Yeah. Well, look, Dougie, what a great way to finish. I just want to thank you for your time, your authenticity, some of the insights that I think you've shared will be very helpful for people. For me, it's been a Barry conversation.
Thanks, mate. I'm so glad you're back in my life, honestly. I mean that for the bottom of my heart.
Cool. Thanks, Dougie.
Take care. Thanks, Pete.